Yo, what is up? What is up? You are listening to the NBA Big Board Podcast. And in today's episode, Richard Stayman, aka Mavs Draft, even though he has on a Vancouver Grizzlies shirt today, we will discuss the biggest risks in the 2022 NBA Draft. Stay tuned. All right, shout out to each and every person that has made the NBA Locked On NBA Big Board Podcast. Got to make sure I get it right. The Locked On NBA Big Board Podcast, your first listen of the day. I am your host, Rafael Barlowe, aka, I don't even have an AKA. I got to come up with one. But I know Mavs Draft is, wait, what is your AKA? Is it the
Clipper.
The Clip Man? That's what it is. The AKA.
Hey, you're the international guru. You know every international prospect, every single player overseas that has touched a basketball in their life. That is a fact.
Okay, international Ralph. I never heard this Bo Cruz kid though. That was my first time hearing him, but he sang pretty good. All right, so let's get right into it. Today we're going to talk about some of the biggest risks in this draft class. I'll let you go first, Richard. In your opinion, who is the biggest risk in the 2022 NBA draft?
Man, this is just something you've heard every single week. I feel like we record. I say this person's a risk. I have to start with him. Jeremy Sochan from Baylor. I think there's some red flags around his offensive game, just really negating a bunch of his defensive prowess. I love his defense. I mean, he was the best defender probably in the conference last year in the Big 12. And I just worry about it translating up to the NBA in full because of that offense.
So very interesting. I know I spoke with you offline about it, but I had a scout from NBA Team reach out to me yesterday. And I won't go too deep into the conversation, but he had, I'd say, a list of 20 questions about Sochan. And some of it was like intel, which I didn't know. I mean, I've never actually met him outside of this brief interview I did at the combine. So I didn't know really anything about like his background or how he is as a person, but I'd say maybe half of the questions were about him as a player, how would he fit with their system. And one question was, if he doesn't make it, if he doesn't succeed as an NBA player, what would be my guess as to why? And my answer was pretty obvious. I think it's the shooting. I think that's the biggest swing skill for him. And if he becomes a reliable shooter, it opens up everything else that he has in this game. If he's not a good shooter, then the passing isn't going to really, he's not going to be able to maximize his strengths there. And so, and I like Sochan. Like, he's not on my list as one of the biggest risks, but I totally get it from your point. And one of the comments I made to the scout was, if the jump shot never translates or it never develops, then he's Andre Roberson. And Andre Roberson probably doesn't survive in this era of the NBA. What are your thoughts on that? Or do you have like a worst case scenario comparison?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty much it. The worst case is along those lines, and also just the lack of athleticism kind of scares me out on offense, because it's so weird on defense. You see that he's a very good athlete, and I think in the open court too, but in the half court, just he doesn't explode off of pump fakes. He doesn't finish above the rim very well in traffic, despite good size. So that stuff's a little bit alarming to me. But the comparison I put for a worst case, very similar overall, just an outcome, is just Jared Culver. I think you look at a bigger Jared Culver, a guy who didn't blow by guys, had good skills everywhere, was a very good defender, but just couldn't put it all together to make a meaningful impact. I think being 6'9" helps Sochan a lot more, though. Culver was like 6'4", 6'5". It's a big notable difference, but just similar play style.
Yeah, and I think, at least I feel like Sochan has at least he has a defined skill set as a defender, if you consider that a skill set. Now, whether or not it allows him to be effective in like the playoffs, if let's say, he's on a team in the playoffs, is his offense good enough to allow him to stay on the floor and be an impactful defender. So, but yeah, I can see what you're saying. He's one of your biggest risks. Mine is, I'd say my first one is Chet Holmgren. And I say that just because it's tough to compare. And I know everything that he brings to the table. And I don't want to spend too much time talking about Chet. We've talked about him extensively before. I do think there are some concerns about his best position and who he can defend. I think he's going to be a good team defender. But I think that he's Marcus Camby with a jump shot. Now, Marcus Camby had a long career. I think he played like 100 years. And, one of the best rebounders and shot blockers of his era. But at number one or number two, I'm not sure. But let's talk about the guy that I think is one of the biggest risks. And it's not because of his playing style. It's probably more so because of his medicals. It is AJ Griffin. AJ Griffin is a phenomenal shooter. Now, here's a question for you before I go too deep into mine. Did you think he was this good of a shooter coming into college basketball?
Nope. And the first game I watched, I saw that base and I would go, what in the world? How is he even going to shoot like 35%? And then until I think mid-February, he was shooting 50% from three on decent sample size.
Yeah. And I felt like if he got the ball in the corners, he didn't miss. He was automatic. And he ended up shooting like 45% from three. So on one hand, I'm buying the upside, but it's the medicals that scare me. And there's another guy that I think you'll probably talk about later, who I think his medical history or his injury history is even more concerning, but he won't be as high as a pick. But I think with AJ Griffin, it's just all going to boil down to the medicals. And so far, I mean, we are around 7, 8, maybe 9 days away from the draft. My days are all kind of running into each other. So far, we haven't heard anything about his medical reports, which is a good sign. But then again, you got to take it with a grain of salt, because if you do hear something, it could be a team that could be smokescreen or it could be true. But I saw that. I mean, I'm a Blazers fan, so I saw Dame Lillard was at the Blazers, or he was at AJ Griffin's workout with the Blazers. It looked like he was really engaged with it also. Like I wonder if he's like, keep him. Nah, if you take him, we got to move him. So general manager Dame was definitely in the house. What are your thoughts on AJ Griffin as a risk?
Yeah, I mean, the health, I think the positive thing, kind of what you said with, we would have heard it by now, is look, he got healthier as the season went on. He never really regressed back towards that. I think in the first month and a half, I'd say till just right before conference play in the end of December, I think you could tell he had come off an injury just by the minutes, just by the way he didn't put full force into a lot of his drives, didn't explode. And then I noticed in February, January, you start seeing him pump fake really fast explosion out of getting his man in the air. And to me, that's a really positive sign that we kept seeing him only improve. We never saw him slow down, regress. And I want to emphasize again, I don't think there's really any major risk factors to his actual skill set.
Right.
It's just the injuries is what could scare us. And I'm always scared of guys with lower body injuries that young. It's played a lot of players, but also doesn't always have to mean a death wish.
Now, I could be wrong here, but I don't think he's had any surgeries. Is that true to your knowledge?
I don't know. I don't want to speak to it. As I'm typing, I'm typing. Yeah, no, I don't see anything. His sister had surgery. That's all I found for AJ Griffin surgery.
Yeah, I don't think he had any like surgery. So that's a positive. All right, before we get into the next round of prospects that we think could be risky, we got big news. If you remember the words boom shakalaka, then you remember NBA Jam. The one and only NBA Jam is back. Arcade 1-Up, the leader in at-home retro arcade games, is not only bringing the best game ever back, but they've made it bigger than ever with a, wait for it, Shaq Edition machine. So people are obsessed with NBA Jam and we are thrilled to tell our listeners that you can once again play hoops with NBA legends in this arcade classic. Jump clear across the court and set the ball on fire in one of the first sports games ever to feature real and digitized NBA licensed teams. No fouls, no free throws, no quarters required. Compete with friends and family through the all-new Wi-Fi leaderboards, making you more connected than ever. You can pre-order now from arcade1up.com. That's arcade, the number one up.com. There's an estimated early September ship date. Arcade One Up is the place for fun. They've got even more classics like Golden Tee, Mortal Kombat, and many others starting at just $399. Now check this out. Check it out. Listen clear. They are giving away an NBA Jam Shaq edition to a Locked On listener. Enter for a chance to win a game console for your very own man cave at arcade1up.com/locked on. That is arcade, the number one up.com/locked on. You got till July 8th to enter to win the NBA Jam Shaq edition. Do not miss out. Enter today. Now, Richard, who are you going to play with?
Dude, I grew up a Magic fan. So, I mean, we got Penny. They always had options like Penny and Shaq. You also had Penny and Nick Anderson. Was
Dennis Scott on there too?
I think so, because he was one of the he was such a sharpshooter. He had to be.
I'm sure he had the fireball going. All right, shout out to each and every person that has made the Locked On NBA Big Board your first listen of the day. All right, now Richard, who is next on your list of guys that could be a little risky?
Yeah, I'll go down the board a little bit. We started probably top 10 prospects, but let's move to some guys that are at the end of the first, early second. I'll start with Patrick Baldwin Jr. He had a disaster of the last 12 months, I would say. He was okay in the FIBAs, didn't shoot the ball very well, but it looked good, and you could just account it to misses and just unluckiness. But given the sample size, I don't even think they played 10 games. So, you can't take a ton of takeaways from it. But for somebody who's crowned an elite shooter, he only shot 32% in FIBA, and in college, it wasn't much better. And then he also had some injuries too. I don't know how much that actually weighs for all of that, but I mean, he shot 27%, 74% from the line. Those are alarming numbers. If you didn't know who he was, you would not be considering him a prospect given his size. And I know it's something we've talked about in the past, but just tested terribly in athleticism at the combine. Really alarming last 12 months for him.
Yeah, if his name is Patrick Banneker with his stats and combine testing, we wouldn't even be talking about him. And not only were the numbers kind of rough, I'm more concerned about the injuries. And you had mentioned the last 12 months. It might even be longer than that. Like, he really hasn't, if you really take a deep dive into it, he hasn't played well since he was a junior in high school. So he missed, if I'm not mistaken, he missed almost all of his senior year, had a short stint at the under 19, and they say he even played injured there. Then they're saying that he wasn't fully healed during the season. So if you're looking at that, and let's say that's the reason for the numbers and the poor athletic testing. So now we're talking about just off of that alone, then he hasn't healed from a lower leg injury. I think it was an ankle injury in 2 years. That's risky, very risky. So even if that is like I said, the main reason for the decline, is it worth a pick?
I mean, and then on top of that, I loved his jump shot at first, and I took a little bit of a deep dive into it. It is a slow shot, and he fades back. I don't know if he gets it off over NBA defenses. There's a lot to be concerned about. He was crowned an elite shooter who I don't think he's an elite shooter on form anymore. I used to think it was the case, but I mean, that combination is scary. Concerns about your best skill plus injury history is a very dangerous red flag.
And athleticism.
Exactly. That's a trifecta.
Yeah. I don't have him getting drafted. I think he will, but if it were, I don't know why it's a shocker. What has he done to be drafted in the last 2 years? If he gets drafted, it is based off of the reputation that he had when he was a junior in high school. Somebody's going to take a risk. Now, unless he shoots lights out in a workout, okay. But I think he is, on one hand, he's not going to be a huge risk simply because I don't think he's going to go high. Now, if you take him with a first rounder, he's going to be risky. And then on one hand, you can say he's worth the risk because, he's 6'10" and he's, the measurables are good. And if he does end up being this shooter, but my thing is, if the skill set that you're supposed to hang your hat on and you're not an elite shooter, you haven't shown to be an elite shooter, then what are you really bringing to the table?
Yeah. And I don't personally see him going top 40. I'd be pretty shocked. So it's not that shocking now that I think about it, but it's just, I haven't heard that anybody say it. Every year there's a surprise undrafted player, and it's probably, and there's a good chance. Let me ask you this before we move on to the next person. I know this is a little bit of foreshadowing here, but who do you see is more likely to get drafted? Patrick Baldwin Jr. or Peyton Watson?
Both.
Good answer.
Yeah. I mean, I think both will get drafted.
Good answer. I'll let you do your next one.
Yeah, I mean, we can go 2 in a row since we talked about Peyton Watson.
Let's do it.
I'll go to my risk about Peyton Watson. I think that it's the shooting for him, but it's a small sample size. Like, even though he may have X amount of games of experience this year, it's a small sample size, but he has the physical tools. He has the intangibles that you like. I feel safer with selecting Peyton Watson over Patrick Baldwin Jr. simply because, I mean, you don't have the injury history. I think with Patrick Baldwin Jr., you got a whole bunch of different red flags. With Watson, at least I know that he has the athleticism. And I know some people, can say athleticism is overrated, or, you can take somebody with skill over athleticism. But I think with Peyton, I think it's going to take a while. I think he needs to go to a team that has some patience in developing him. But I would gamble on an athletic wing ball handler that I think can be a multi-positional defender over someone with an injury history and whose entire success is going to depend on the jump shot, which we think is questionable. So that's why Watson isn't that big of a risk compared to Patrick Baldwin Jr. At least in my opinion.
And the only reason I also bring him up because I am very transparent about this take. I would not draft Peyton Watson. I would not want to be putting him on a 2-way. I'm very all the way out on him. I wasn't a fan of him in the FIBAs. I think he'll get a 2-way. I personally just would not want to be the team that issues it. I know it's such a minor risk. It doesn't really matter. It's just it's semantics at that point. But my thing for him is just he would be, I've seen him, ESPN's most recent mock, they had him at 33. That is still, to me, a massive risk. When you look at the 20s and 30s have almost a similar success rate of NBA players, it's really not that far off. At that point, that's a risk to me. Obviously, it wouldn't be a guaranteed contract necessarily, but I would not be taking Peyton Watson that high. I think there's a lot of concerns. I don't buy the shot at all. I don't think it looks that great myself. But the production doesn't lie. The kid went, I think, a month without scoring, which scares me. It really scares me. Granted, there was a week shutdown of COVID, but he went a month without scoring. Even 3 weeks without 1 point is very alarming.
That might be the craziest stat. And you know what's crazy is that, and I get into this before we take a break, is that if you post that, I don't know if you've posted it, but if you've posted that on Twitter, you have to be prepared for people calling you a hater. And it's that's not been a hater. You just posted a fact. And I just think it's the world that we live in. If you say 9 great things about him, and if you say he didn't score in a month, all of a sudden you're a hater. And I've had people in my DMs making mild threats because I said something that was kind of critical about a player. Crazy world.
Dude, there were 9 games in 9 out of 20 games. And from November to actually evenly on the months, it was a 3-month span to February where he had 0 points in a game. That's almost 50% of games where he had 0 points. That blows my mind. I've been a very vocal hater of Peyton Watson, and I've definitely seen that. It's wild to me.
And you know, the thing that I didn't feel sorry for prospects in a sense, because I felt like college, you pick where you go to school. You can't pick where you get drafted. College, you pick where you go to school. You have an opportunity to study the coach, the system, who's coming back. And the reason I give Watson the benefit of the doubt here is because everybody thought Johnny Juzang was gone. And when Juzang came back after having a rough combine last year, I think it just really, really messed Peyton Watson up. And he probably should have went back to school. Maybe not UCLA, but if he enters the transfer portal, he could potentially, if he goes to, the right system, I think he could have helped his draft stock. But now he took a risk by staying in the draft, and he's one of the riskier prospects in your opinion. All right, we got one more segment left, but let's talk about Rock Auto. And with the ever increasing numbers of makes and models, it is impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts that you need. So no need to go through the pointless and intimidating questioning about what type of car you have and what model, and wait for the person behind the counter to order the parts on their computer. When you have the computer access to rockauto.com at home or in your pocket, you can save time and money using Rock Auto, and no need to spend 30, 50, and even 100% for the same parts from a chain store or a car dealership. Well, you can go to rockauto.com. Rock Auto is a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. Rock Auto's prices are reliably low for every customer. They have everything you can need, brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, and even new carpet. Go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Right, locked on in their How Did You Hear About Us box, so they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need at rockauto.com. All right, you're listening to the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast. This is Rafael Barlowe. He's Richard Stayman, and we are talking about the riskiest players in this draft class. So he did a back-to-back with Peyton Watson and Patrick Baldwin Jr. And speaking of Patrick Baldwin Jr., Tankathon has him still going 20, which is crazy to me.
No.
Right. So one of my riskiest players is the teammate of the guy that you had number one on your list, and it is Kendall Brown. And with Kendall Brown, I feel like the same stuff you can say about Jeremy, you can say about Kendall. Kendall, the percentages from three was a little bit better. You look at it on paper, 34% is pretty good, but I'm not a believer in it. I think that he can develop into a reliable shooter, but the free throw percentage was only 68.9% from the free throw line. And he's such a reluctant scorer. And maybe he gets a coach like Nick Nurse that puts a battery in his back and charges them all up and makes him a little bit more aggressive. We saw that happen with Scotty Barnes last year. But Kendall Brown was just too unassertive for me. And I mean, we know he's like a tremendous athlete, but I think he's a risk because his main skill set are his athleticism and his passing. And if you can't shoot and if you're not a scorer, then I think it's hard to maximize your gifts as a passer, which I can say the same thing about Peyton Watson also. What are your thoughts on Kendall Brown?
Yeah, I'm still a believer. I've got him a lottery grade just because I think the defense is so strong. I think what separates him and Sochan, because they are very similar players, what separates them for me is that athleticism. I really do think Kendall Brown is a dominant athlete compared to Jeremy Sochan. And for me, he knows how to use it in the half court. Great off ball. I think he's the best cutter in the draft. And on top of that, like the passing drop off is not very far for me. I know Sochan's a more traditional point guard in the way he runs the offense. Kendall Brown is more of a passer who has the ball, but I think the drop offs from them are minimal. And even like you said, with the shooting, yeah, the 34% overstates it. He was scared to shoot a lot. The one positive out of that was like, I'd rather it from a team's perspective, I would rather it be, hey, like if you don't feel 100% confident in this, it's a slow, like college basketball slow. play slow, find a better shot. I don't mind it. Now, he's going to have to start getting comfortable and shooting under 10 seconds left on the clock and making offense. That's going to be where his game does or doesn't translate.
Yeah, when I was at the combine, I spoke to a scout and we were talking about pro days. And he said that, he doesn't really care for going to them, but he has to go. And one of his comments is, if I go to a pro day, I can watch Kendall Brown shoot more shots in 20 minutes from three than he shot his entire season at Baylor. And looking at the numbers, he only attempted 41 threes all season, which is, not a lot. 41 threes, 74 free throws. So if you combine his 3-point attempts and free throw attempts, it is under like 120, which to me, that's pretty interesting. All right. So I'll name another risky player for me. And I guess I'd say this is high risk, but also pretty risky. And that is Trevor Keels. Trevor Keels is, he's one of those guys that just maybe aesthetically or visually, I just wasn't impressed by. I see a guy that's, he's 6'4", like 225 or something like that, on an 18-year-old body, which I think he may need to slim down a little bit. But I've heard people around him say that's just how he's built. Like he can't help it. I don't see like elite level athleticism. I don't see a guy that's going to be able to finish in traffic. I don't see him as a good shooter. We're talking about 41, 31, 67 shooting splits. And yet some people think he's a first rounder. I'm just not. So I think one of the comparisons is Luguentz Dort, but I feel like at least Dort was a better athlete. And I guess the comparison is based off body type and size. But Dort was like a irrational confidence scorer at Arizona State. And then he transitioned into a defender, but he has the athleticism. And I just don't know Trevor Keels' role or the skill set that he can hang his hat on, unless you think that maybe one day he could develop into like a Marcus Smart type player. But other than that,
I think he's got the mold to be this kind of player. This is not a one-to-one at all, but Kyle Lowry, baby Kyle Lowry vibes, and the way he just plays with so much energy, and you hope that just the mentality translates into more useful skills. I mean, Kyle Lowry, for the most part, hasn't been the most efficient player in his time, but still has been a winning player. I don't think Trevor Keels has star upside like that, but some team might convince themselves to do so just to kind of address that first round part, because I think he will go first round. He's so young, and teams will convince themselves, hey, he has a Kyle Lowry mold or something, like Marcus Smart mold, something like that. But yeah, I mean, the jump shot is very far away. I think you can fix it. It's not broken. But like you said, the athleticism is going to be what makes or breaks his career. There are guys who can defend while not being great athletes. Can Trevor Keels be one of those guys? You watch him at playing a high drive, a high pick and roll, anything like that, and he's cooked. And to me, that's a big test of defensive athleticism and just overall defensive ability. And he doesn't pass that test, even though he is a bulldog on defense.
And see, here's why I don't see him going first round. I'm looking at the teams at the back end of the first round. Does Denver take him? No. Does Memphis? I don't see.
It might.
Golden State?
No.
Miami? I don't think so. I think they probably would look for some scoring.
They'll consider it.
Dallas?
That's who ESPN mocked him to last. I don't like it, but
yeah. Spurs, I think they get rid of those picks. Bucks. And so I think what teams that are going late in the first round, and from everything that I've been hearing, is they want like guys that they feel like can come in and play right away. That's why Andrew Nembhard is starting to get first round grades. That's why I've heard guys like Jake LaRavia are getting first round grades, because some of the teams that are picking at the back end feel like they are, they can compete for a title next year. I know you can probably say that every year, but I feel like if you look at Denver, they can say, well, if we get everybody healthy, we're a title contender next year. Memphis can say, we'll be a year older. We can compete for a title. Golden State is definitely trying to compete for a title. Miami can say, hey, if we, get Kyle Lowry in shape and we get, a couple pieces together, we'll compete for a title. Dallas has to be encouraged by making it to the conference finals. San Antonio, which, that I don't think they're going to take that pick. Milwaukee feels like they'll be back. Philly may feel like they'll be back with a whole year of Harden and Embiid. And so I think some of those teams are going to gamble on somebody that they think can come in and play minutes, maybe 10 to 15 minutes right away. And that's why I just don't think Trevor Keels can. Well, all right, man, we got another show to do in a few minutes. That wraps up this episode. Once again, shout out to each and every person that has made the NBA Big Board podcast your first listen of the day. Now, for your second listen, check out the Locked On NBA podcast. We are possibly one game away from the conclusion of the 21-22 NBA season, and the Locked On NBA podcast will be there giving you all the insight and analysis from the last possibly 1 or 2 games left of the NBA Finals. So check it out. Once again, it's Rafael Barlowe, Director of Scouting, NBA Big Board. Richard Stayman, a.k.a. Mavs Draft, a.k.a. the Clip God. And we are out.